What's up, everybody? We hope you're well. Mike, you've got a weird one for us tonight.
So it's kind of a story we've heard millions of times before, but with a little bit of a twist. But it's just this weird story of a UFO crash, but it's not your ordinary type of UFO crash because of the way that it was released is a lot different than most of these stories are. So, have you ever heard of the UFO researcher, Tony Dodd?
It sounds very familiar. I believe I've come across him in other research.
He was a UK researcher.
Right.
But he used to be a police officer. And then he had his own kind of encounter, and from that point on, he wanted to investigate UFOs. So, I guess to start off, I'll kind of go over his encounter, so that we've, kind of got a background on him. But he ended up passing away a few years ago. Actually, it was like 10 years ago, I think. But he had a brain tumor, and it ended up claiming his life in the end. But he was well known as one of Britain's leading UFO researchers. He wrote a book called Alien Investigator, and he was the one who kind of blew this, I shouldn't say blew this case out of the water, but the one that kind of actually brought attention to the case. But his interest in UFOs started in December of 1978. Like I said, he was a police officer, and he was on patrol at 4:30 in the morning, and he said he was kind of daydreaming, just kind of anyone who's taken a late night drive, it's easy to just kind of drift off and get lost in your surroundings, and that's kind of what he was doing. And he said suddenly he was pulled out of his daydream, or more, I don't know what his thoughts, we'll say. He was pulled out of his thoughts by this loud static noise, and he said it sounded like static and hissing combined. And he was coming along the curve in a road, and off to his right he saw this bright white light, and he said it seemed to be coming towards him, and it looked like it was gliding almost. But when he first came around the bend, he thought that it was an airplane that had caught fire. So he pulls over, gets out of the car to see what's going on. And as he's standing there, this thing flies over him. He said it was 100 feet above them. And it flew over at, he estimated, roughly 40 miles an hour. So not very fast for something that's flying. And he said when it flew over, it was this big shining disc that flew over their head, and he was able to see that there was a dome type shape on top. And he said in the dome he was able to see portholes that went all the way around it, and the bottom of the craft was surrounded by colored lights, and he said they looked kind of like neon lights, and they were blue, red, green, and white, and they blinked in some sort of sequence. He said it seemed like they were rotated, the colors were blinking around the perimeter like they were rotating around the ship. And in the middle, there were 3 spheres. And he said it was about 100 feet in diameter. And other than the static, it didn't make any noise.
That's weird. Just the static, huh?
Yeah, just the staticky noise. And it was, from that point on, he was basically invested in UFOs and started investigating them. Once he retired as a police officer, he became a full-time UFO researcher. So it's with that backstory in mind that we get to the weird case of the Kalahari Desert UFO crash. So I'm going to first explain the incident itself. And then I'll get into the weird occurrence as to how this story came out into the public. But the story itself took place in 1989. It was May of 1989. And there was an unknown aircraft that was entering South African airspace. They had no idea what it was, so they scrambled these Mirage fighter jets to intercept whatever this object was that wasn't responding. The fighter pilots received orders to engage, and they started to fire on it. And they ended up hitting the craft, and the craft came to a stop over the Kalahari Desert. It was about 80 miles from the border between South Africa and Botswana. And after it came to a stop over the desert, it ended up crashing. Then the jets that were firing on it, basically, one of them stayed and circled the site until ground troops could arrive and collect the object. Allegedly, the area around the crash was so hot that the sand had fused together into like glass, and there was high radioactivity on the site, and it was apparently so radioactive that it began to affect the military's electrical equipment, and some of the equipment ended up failing.
Wow.
But the craft itself was said to be a polished, smooth silver material. There were no seams, no rivets, no screws, no nuts, no bolts. Just this smooth, polished surface.
Now, I was going to wait a second to point this out to you and ask you this question, but since you've just described this one in this crash, with Dude's first experience where he saw this one with the windows, what do you think of when you hear about UFOs that have windows like that? Because if they're doing interstellar travel, I don't think windows are going to work on something like that. It almost makes it feel like these people are having hallucinations when it comes to seeing craft with windows like that.
Yeah, the windows thing always did seem kind of weird. I could see it being a couple of different things. If we want to go the alien route and say that these are alien craft, then the craft themselves that we're seeing probably aren't the craft that are being used for interstellar travel. They're probably used more for local travel, like from maybe a larger ship that's outside of Earth's atmosphere or outside of the orbit of Earth, or maybe hiding on the moon, or whatever. Maybe even Mars. I don't fucking know. But maybe these are the smaller craft that are used to just kind of jump around the solar system really quick, but not to travel between galaxies or between star systems, just among the local planets, just to kind of get from here to there really quick. But it's small, so it's not made for long distance travel. Right,
a little speeder or something like that.
Yeah. So when they come to Earth, they've got the windows because they're checking shit out. They're the explorer ships, the spy ships, or maybe the science crew. I don't know, but they have the windows to look out. Another thing is a lot of the people that'll report seeing these portholes or windows will also report seeing beings inside of them. Typically, they'll see the beings looking out, or see what appear to be humanoid beings moving around inside. And I think that if it was that sort of situation where it's the craft that's coming here is here to observe and document, then windows might be necessary to actually see. And you could say, well, with their technology, why would they've got cameras, why would they need windows? And yeah, but sometimes you want to just see with your eyes instead of looking through a camera.
Right.
But then you've got the other instances where it could be like the where it's just light coming from inside of it, and maybe that's just like part of the surface, just this weird light coming through.
Yeah, maybe that's part of its propulsion system. I mean, I think you make a great point. Maybe these windowed ones are for local travel, and maybe that's why we get reports of ones with no windows. Those are the ones meant for deeper space travel.
I mean, you might be onto something there. Like maybe the big crafts, like whatever it was during the Phoenix Lights incident. Maybe those are like the big ones, because that one was like a mile wide or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, dude. Maybe that's something we should do too, is do like a hangout and watch the Phoenix Lights footage, because that just doesn't get old.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. That whole thing is just it's still mind-blowing to me, that incident, and the fact that thousands of people witnessed it.
Yep.
That's I mean, that's got to be the greatest UFO sighting of all time. I can't think of anything that would beat that.
Yeah, I've said it before on the show, but I mean, a lot of people want to see a UFO or some type of footage or proof, and that's the closest thing. That's the biggest thing that's ever happened, and people just kind of, oh yeah, the Phoenix Lights. I think when you talk about Phoenix Lights, you got to also talk about how that shit might be real, no matter who's piloting that shit, you know?
Yeah, that would be like with all these official military UFO releases. I'm surprised we haven't gotten anything more about Phoenix Lights. But then again, it's so far removed at this point that if they were to release it now, we'd be like, well, where the fuck have you been for the past 30 years?
That,
you know?
That and like blatant tampering, right? Telling people to keep their mouths shut about it, not report on it.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
Yeah. There's and that's a slippery slope with disclosure, and I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle to get over, like trying to figure out a way to disclose this information to the public without admitting to them that you've been lying to them for the past 60 years.
Well, don't you think Trump's the perfect president to be in office for that? Like, I'm not picking on the guy. Nobody get riled up. I'm just saying, with the attitude he has, don't you think he would be the one to just say, you know, well, what else did you want us to do? I don't have a good Trump impression. I'm sorry. What else did you want us to do?
I think because of the type of person that Trump is, he would be the last president that they would tell this information to.
Really?
Yeah. Because he's a petulant child, let's be real. Like the way that he reacts to things like a little kid. And if he were to have this information, that it would not be a secret. And I mean, I guess if you wanted to have somebody put that information out there, then yeah, give it to him, because it would get out there. But if you didn't want the whole story out there and you wanted to control the flow of disclosure, he would be the last person you'd want to get involved. Like you'd want to take it out of the hands of the government, really. You know, like maybe have things like linked, like with military contracts and former government officials involved. But as far as all the releases and everything, you wouldn't want to go the route of releasing that through the government, because you can't control it at that point. It's this massive bureaucracy. So you let a couple people know, and then if they let a couple of people know, then it spirals out of control. Then you get a situation where nothing comes out because all of this information is being quote unquote leaked. And then nobody knows, because we've had leaked information for decades now, and it's gotten us nowhere. It's just, you know, this military official says this, and this military official witnessed this, and then it just becomes hearsay. And then you've got the people that say they've got government ties, and they're continually like, oh, disclosure is on the way, disclosure, and there's no payoff. And so I think, like, as much shit as I've talked about to the Stars Academy, I think if you're going to do disclosure, it's going to be something like that. That being said, I don't think To the Stars Academy are on the up and up. I don't think they are what they claim to be. And I think that they're really, more than anything, I think that they are branch of disinformation for the military.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with that. And I totally agree. Now that you put it that way, I always tend to forget, but you always got to consider disinformation. Trump, after you saying that, sounds like the perfect disinformation president to give the information to. He would definitely, I don't know, I'm not going to say definitely, I apologize. He seems very business savvy, and if they told him that, or he found out about that, in his mind, that's a card in his pocket. So that's something he can use against them. They would probably give him shit that they'd want to put out, but I have to agree with you even further that's not going to be the people who release that information. It would be that's a great way to cover the lie thing right there, right? This is what we found, and they've confirmed this, but they're not going to talk about it. To be found out's easier than to confess.
Yeah, and that's really it. And then when you have this stuff that comes through and it's just kind of trickled out, like with government witnesses or military witnesses or whatever, then even if you're putting out 100% accurate information and honestly telling the public what happened, there's that deniability because it wasn't an official release. Yeah, this person worked for the government or works for the government, but there's no one to corroborate the story. It's just one person relaying this information that they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to see numbers of officials lining up telling similar stories, it kind of makes you start to believe what's being said. But again, there's no official an official word from the military or the government. So it's not anything that that the mass public are going to believe. I mean, you've got astronauts who've come out and said that they've seen UFOs and they think that there's more out there, and people don't give them the attention that they deserve. I mean, these people had to undergo psychological testing. They had to go undergo physical testing. They had to have just an incredible resume to be chosen as like think of all the people that have been in space in the history of the known history of our world. The amount of people that have gone to space, you could count it on like 3 hands, maybe 4 hands and a foot. But it's very, very, very small amount of people.
Yeah.
And to be chosen as one of those people, you've got to have something special. You're not just an ordinary goon. You're not your average Joe. Like, you've got to prove yourself to be above and beyond all of your peers, and you've got to undergo grueling training. And you're not going to be someone who's prone to flights of fancy or making shit up. So when you come back and you say that you witnessed something while you were out there, or even if you witnessed, like in the case of Gordon Cooper, who witnessed something, he witnessed 2 things while he was in the military, and one while he was a pilot. He witnessed something flying on the Soviet side of East Germany. And then again, when he was one of the top guys on an Air Force base, and a UFO actually landed on the base, and people under his command took pictures of it, and he saw the actual film that these pictures were taken on. And then he later became, with having these experiences, he later became an astronaut. So, I mean, that he had these experiences before he became an astronaut, and they still allowed him to become an astronaut. So that's got to tell you something right there, really.
Right.
Like, not only did they think this dude was the best of the best, but they knew that he had witnessed UFOs in the past and was able to keep his shit and didn't go blabbing to everybody. I mean, eventually he did, but it's something that you can't discount. Wow, I got way off topic. I don't even remember where the fuck what I was talking about.
You were talking about the crash and it being a solid craft instead of one that had windows, and I interjected.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I fucked it.
We went way out.
Sorry, guys.
On that one. Holy shit.
My bad.
Don't apologize. It's part of our charm,
We have charm?
allegedly. But yeah, this craft, after it was retrieved, it was found to be completely smooth and polished looking. There were no seams. There was no rivets. It didn't look like a man-made machine. There were also what they termed as portholes on the craft, but they were unevenly spaced. So it wasn't like they were in uniform positions. They were unevenly spaced around the craft. And they saw on the underside what they assumed to be landing gear. And because it was out, it seemed to suggest that the craft was, it actually landed instead of actually crashing. So it was damaged and it made a landing. And a retrieval team came in. They were able to find a hatch that they opened, and they were able to pull out two beings that were both still alive. And they were described as wearing tight-fitting gray suits, which, you know, it's pretty cliche at this point, but they were wearing tight-fitting gray suits, and they were estimated to be between 4 and 5 feet tall. Their heads were much larger than their bodies. Their eyes were largely out of proportion with the rest of their features. Basically, it was a gray alien. But they, after they took the suits off, they said that around the abdomen, around the abdomen, it was covered in scales. Which is not something that I had heard about the Greys before.
Maybe that fella had an STD, or did both of them have it?
Yeah, they both had it.
Oh, they gave it to each other, the bastards.
Yeah,
Filthy
they were
pigs.
rubbing abdomens.
Space is lonely.
Yeah, I mean, when you're traveling interstellar distances, you got to get love where you can get it, you know. Abdomen scales be damned.
I'll risk it, baby.
Yeah. But the craft got rounded up along with the beings and taken to some unknown military base in South Africa. It's a secret base, I guess, it's hidden in the desert and covered with sand, or the entrance is covered in sand, so that you can't tell where it is. But once they got it there, it was apparently sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the United States. And as more information came out throughout Dodd's investigation, he realized that what had happened was the U.S. was monitoring this craft and saw that it entered over South African airspace. So they notified the South African government about it, who then scrambled the jets to take it down. And the U.S. military made a deal, a secret, like, backdoor deal with the South African government, where they traded the craft with the beings for nuclear technology. And this was something that was illegal under international law. So the United States wouldn't have been able to give this information to the South Africans, like, by legit means. So they arranged this trade so that they could trade the wrecked spacecraft for nuclear power, basically.
You think they pulled a Tony Stark and gave him like a pinball machine instead?
I don't know. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. Who's to say? But based on this information and information that Dodd was able to get from his own personal military contracts, there are 3 alien bodies, but the South African military did not tell the United States about the third one. So they gave 2 to the Americans and kept one of these beings in the secret facility referred to Camp 13.
So they pulled the Tony Stark.
Yeah. So they've got their own alien under lock and key, but they don't know if the alien's still there, if it's still alive, what happened to it. There's no further information, and there's no information about the 2 bodies that were sent to Wright-Patterson either.
They went on to become the Olsen twins.
Maybe, but it is interesting to note that there have been a lot of deathbed confessions from people that have worked in secret military bases or secret government facilities that talk about alien bodies being in like cryostasis. So maybe that's what ended up happening with these guys. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Most likely.
So now for the weird story of how this came to light. And a few months after the actual incident took place, fuck you. No, it's giving me fuck you, computer. God damn it, I can't win. Okay. So a few months after the incident took place, Tony Dodd received these documents in the mail. It was an envelope that came to his address that had a South African postmark on it. And the sender, the person that sent the information, kept his identity secret, and he said it was for because he was concerned about his own safety. So when Tony Dodd was inspecting it, he got the inkling that the documents were not real. They were printed to look like official South African government documents, but when he was reading through them, he noticed that things were spelled incorrectly all over the place. And that wouldn't be the case if this was an official government document. There wouldn't be all these misspelled words, and it wouldn't. He said it just looked off. It didn't look like it looked like someone trying to create an official document rather than an official document. But for some reason, it captivated him, and he read the full document. And despite all of the misspellings and everything, the document itself contained a lot of very strong attention to detail. And this led him, he said this kind of made him believe that maybe there was something more to it than just a hoax or fake documents. The feeling being that with fake documents, they would they wouldn't go into the same detail that a military investigator might go into. And what he was seeing here was a very keen attention to detail. Now, me personally, as being an asshole skeptic, I would say that this would also be indicative of someone who is a decent writer. You know, if he's making up a story, provide as many details as he can. But that's just me. But there's if you look at it from just that alone, then yeah. But there's more to the story than that. But Tony Dodd was able to use contacts that he had with people within the South African military and the United States military, and who have been able to give him information related to UFOs and UFO research in the past. And when he checked in with them, all his contacts that would have information on this indicated that this incident really occurred. So this kind of confused Dodd. Why would somebody send official looking documents but that were forgeries but tell him real information? So Dodd ended up getting the person who sent the documents ended up getting in touch with him, and it was a man named James Van Grunen, and he agreed to come to England to meet Tony Dodd and help him with the investigation so that they could look into that. And once he got to England and met with Dodd, he actually witnessed a bunch of weird things that popped up. One was that this Van Grunen person would receive threatening phone calls from the South African embassy while he was in England. He recorded the calls so that he could use them for evidence. And while he was there, Tony Dodd was also became aware of people that were following him around. And they didn't do anything or act threateningly, but they were always there following him around. So he began to wonder if these types of things were occurring, then maybe this information was real, but it still didn't answer why the documents were faked and why it had to be sent in this way. Now, again, as a skeptic, we could say that this Van Grunen guy is just a really big troll. It created this incident, and when he arrived in England, he arrived with some friends, and we're like, all right, hey, call me and make threats like you're from the embassy, and Jim, you follow me around and act creepy. And then they did that, and it just kind of makes his story look legit.
Yeah, how would at that time they be able to tell that these calls were coming from the embassy in Africa?
Yeah, I'm not sure how he was able to determine that. I don't know if he was able to trace the calls back or if he was just going based on the recordings that this Van Grunen guy gave him.
Maybe this Van Grunen dude doesn't even exist at all. I mean, that's easier to say.
Yeah, maybe that's a fake name too. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he, after this initial meeting, they actually met again when Tony Dodd was in a UFO conference in Germany. And there, once they met at this conference, Van Grunen told Dodd the reality of the situation and why he sent these fake documents. So Van Grunen was apparently an amateur UFO enthusiast, and he was able to start looking into classified UFO documents because of a friend that he had in the South African military. So his friend worked at a place where he apparently worked at the secret military base near the Kalahari Desert. And finding out about this situation and knowing his friend was a UFO enthusiast, he was able to sneak these documents out of the base for his friend to look at, with the agreement that he couldn't take any copies or pictures or anything. He just could read them, and then his friend brought them back to the base. So he was able to spend a lot of time reading them, but like I said, since he couldn't make copies, he had to write this information out by memory. And he studied them so much that he was able to repeat most of what was there from memory. So he created these documents to make them look official, so that when he sent it to Dodd, it would automatically raise flags that this is important information and you should read this. And the reason he did this was because he feared if he just came out and told the story about this incident, that no one would believe him because he's just an amateur UFO enthusiast. So of course, he's into UFOs. He's got no evidence, so he's coming out to say this, and it's probably just him trying to be a fame whore or something. So he created these documents, sent them over to Tony Dodd, and that started the investigation. And like I said, Tony Dodd has people has contacts within the military who were able to confirm that this event did in fact happen. And the contacts in South Africa confirmed that there were 3 bodies, but one was kept. They confirmed the exchange for nuclear technology. The U.S. contacts confirmed that the craft and the 2 alien bodies were sent to Wright-Patterson, and from there, they don't know what happened. So it's kind of a really weird story. Like, if it wasn't for Dodd being able to confirm with the military officials from both militaries that were involved that the event did happen, then I wouldn't believe the story at all. I'd say it was just some guy making stuff up, and he got caught for forging documents, and so he made up this whole backstory as to why he had to forge the documents.
Right. I think old Dodd there is a little trickier than that. I think that this might have been kind of a troll. I think that he cooked up this whole story about documents and this dude, and then went to his contacts and was like, hey, I mean, literally just cooked up what he thought would be the best idea. Like you said, it's got telltale signs of a good writer. And he just cooked up these fake notes and confronted his contacts with this, saying, hey, I've got this information. You know, I need to know what's going on with this. I need you to tell me what's up with this. And they had no other choice but to confirm. I think he kind of just tricked some information out of a couple governments.
It could be, maybe. Once he got all this information, though, he went public with it. And once he went public, he started getting threats to his life from mysterious people. He was warned at one point that he would be safe so long as he stayed within the UK. But if he were to go to South Africa or even France, because France at the time had a military alliance with South Africa, that he was likely to be assassinated. So he avoided those places. And then in 1991, he got a warning in Arizona. He was at a UFO seminar. Him and his wife were sitting there with two other UFO researchers after the seminar, talking, having a drink, whatever. And all of a sudden, two men in dark suits came up to the table, and without saying anything, they looked at the two researchers that they were with, and those two researchers just left. And they sat down at the table and warned Dodd to be careful about what he spoke about. Apparently, everything, it was like a mafia type thing. Like, they were polite the entire time, you know, very respectful and polite. But the underlying message was basically, if you don't listen to what we're saying, we're going to kill you. And he said after that night, they ended up meeting, Tony Dodd himself ended up meeting the two men again the next morning. And they reiterated what they had talked about the night before. But he said this time around, rather than feeling like there was the underlying threat, this was more of a warning. Like, hey, remember what we said? We don't want to have to do this, but if you don't toe the line, then we're going to fuck you up.
Wow. Some Phil Schneider stuff.
Yeah. So officially, this whole thing that took place is, of course, not acknowledged by either the South African or United States government. But based on the information Dodd was able to get from his contacts, it seems like this is another one that is being denied and swept under the rug, but it may have really happened.
So, what's the confirmation he's got that makes this believable for you, that this event actually took place? What makes the evidence so strong for you?
Well, so there's really no evidence. And this is another one of those cases where it's you're going based on the reputation of the person that's putting this out. And Tony Dodd, he was a well-respected researcher. He was a former police officer. And again, we've talked about what makes a witness credible, and a lot of people, he's a police officer, so he's, you know, more credible than Johnny McBike driver. But I mean, he to me, his experience that he had as a police officer that led him to become a prominent UFO researcher, that makes me kind of believe what he says, at least in regard to the topic of UFOs and UFO visitation. I think he got into it because he was mystified by his own experience, and he was curious about it and wanted to know why these things were happening and what they were, and I don't think because he was driven into the field based on an experience that he had, that he would be one that would want to muddy the waters and intentionally create this story, especially considering all the other work he's done. It just seems weird to fabricate this story. So I think it's either he got trolled by this guy, and when he went to his contacts in the military, they just kind of went along with it for disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you throw that out there and be like, yeah, that's true, that really happened.
Right.
Then you're muddying the waters. And then because they were his contacts, he trusted them, but didn't realize that they may have been sending him fake information. You know, like with Paul Benowitz, he thought Richard Doty was his friend, that he could trust him, and the whole time Richard Doty was fucking with him.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what lengths are they willing to go? And I'm really interested to see who his contacts in the United States military were,
right,
and if they had anything to do with Richard Doty and his project.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see to know who his contacts were. If it was like a janitor, I don't really give a fuck. But if he had some solid shit,
it's just Janitor Jones who just happens to have the key to the file storage, and he got that information out. He's like, you know what? That really happened. You're absolutely correct. But if it's like fucking a general or something who's like, yep, that really happened, and we got the bodies and blew up the spacecraft, then I believe it. But I don't know. I think it's a great story, and I think that he believed it. And I think in a period of time when we've got people like Bob Lazar telling stories about what happened with him and the United States government researching UFOs, and the amount of incredible stories that have been told by other United States military servicemen and women, as well as government officials, and they all kind of tie in and seem very similar. Like, and maybe it's because that's like the archetype of a crash scenario now, but maybe there's a reason behind it. Maybe all these things are being reported in the same way because they're similar situations. Another thing that I find interesting about this is that it took place in '89. This isn't something that happened in the late 40s or 50s when we hear about a lot of these old crash things and body retrievals taking place. And the fact that it was in the late 80s is, at this point, the military had been, if we're going back to Blue Book, had been researching UFOs for decades. And then and they were somehow monitoring this and knew the craft had entered Earth's atmosphere and that it was going to be over South Africa. And then it's the thing is, it's really hard to, and I think it's done intentionally this way, but it's really hard to get a real reading or gauge the interest of the government and military and UFOs, because after Blue Book concluded, they stated that there was they stated there was no known cases of, or no reason for UFOs to be in or feared, or they didn't pose any threat to national security. So it wasn't anything that we needed to be concerned with. And then, hold on.
No worries.
So that they say after the conclusion of Blue Book that they're done researching UFOs, and then you've got this new information coming out saying that, hey, we've been investigating UFOs for all these years now, and this is how much money we've been putting into it every year, and blah blah blah.
Yep, just change the name of the program.
Yeah, that's all it is. I think we should try to wrap this up. My computer's acting fucky, and I don't want to, I want to make sure this recording actually worked because it's doing weird shit. So I don't know what we can say about this guy is he's a well-respected UFO researcher. He's doesn't seem to have any reason to lie, and based on what we know about the government, they lie all the fucking time. So who do you believe?
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast? Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.